So, okay, so these are single cells. So we said that there are certain organisms that are uh, single celled. So if we go back, um, so for instance, a bacteria, uh, we had talked about different shapes of the bacteria and how they're different from each other. So these bacteria were single-celled organisms known as prokaryotes. Okay, so a single-celled organism is known as a prokaryote. Now, some of these terminologies might be daunting for you. They might be very new to you, but if please interrupt if you want more clarification on anything, please let me know. I'm trying my best to go at your level, where I can teach the very basics of the cells. And but if I fail to do so at any point, please feel free to share your thoughts with me at the during the session. So we talked about the bacteria, how they're structured, and then we talked about viruses, that they have a DNA. So DNA causes them to replicate, to multiply, and how they attack cells, human cells. And they cannot reproduce unless they have a host organism. We talked about what a host is, how you can be a good host by reducing your immunity. We talked about COVID-19. Now, fungi, we talked about them. So there were different types of fungi, and there were some causing athlete's foot, which were not very serious. And then there were some lung diseases like aspergillosis, which are life-threatening. These are also called by fungi. And then we come towards prokaryotes, which are also single-celled organisms, which are known as protozoa. Sorry, they are prokaryotes, which means they're single-celled, just like bacteria. They're single-celled. But uh, unlike bacteria, they are eukaryotes. So, so they are single-celled organism, but they are eukaryotes. So you would assume that they're just like bacteria. So let's go back to bacteria. They are single-celled organisms known as prokaryotes. So what are we? What we human beings are eukaryotes. Okay. So uh, the bacteria are different from us because we have multiple cells in our bodies, whereas these organisms, these bacteria are single cell, they live on only one cell. Now, how is this protozoa different from a bacteria? Uh, it is single celled, but they are known as eukaryotes. So there are several types of protozoa. Only a few cause human disease, and these are called pathogenic protozoa. So pathogenic, I told you yesterday that pathogenesis means disease, okay, or disease causing. So a pathogenic organism is one that causes disease. And obviously, if it's severe enough, it will cause death. So protozoa have the ability to move and are therefore called motile. Okay, so protozoa, they are motile, they can move, unlike bacteria, which remain static, so they cannot move around. Okay, so they are classified as three types, on depending on where they cause disease. So you may have intestinal protozoa happening in the intestine. So this is known as Entamoeba histolytica, which causes dysentery. Dysentery is bloody diarrhea. So you have diarrhea, you have loose poo or loose stools, but that includes blood. Okay, so this is a type of organism, a protozoa, that dwells in the intestine. You won't see it on your body surface. You won't see it on the skin surface. You'll see it in the intestine. That's where it lives. Okay, and it causes the diarrhea to have blood in it. Urogenital protozoa. So this is the genital area which it involves. Trichomonas. it causes a type of sexually transmitted disease. So urogenital protozoa will not be found anywhere else. So if it's in the if it is present, it causes an STD or an STI, sexually transmitted infection. Then there is blood and tissue protozoa such as Plasmodium. So this it causes malaria. So this now make sure to understand the difference between a protozoa and a vector. We had talked about what is a vector. So a vector is an organism that carries a disease agent. So the vector here, can anyone tell me what the vector would be here? I had talked about it yesterday. A vector is an organism that carries the
Is there an
infection.
organism that carry diseases from one person to another or from one place to another?
Yes. So in case of Plasmodium or malaria, what would be the vector here? Anyone?
For malaria is
Yes.
is mosquito, I
Very
think.
good. Very good. Brilliant. Yeah, mosquito. Very good. So a vector, a mosquito carries the Plasmodium, the protozoa, and it carries it from one person to another. So there's a person who is unwell, has malaria. That Plasmodium is present in that person's blood. That there's a mosquito, only the female Anopheles mosquito. So the male wouldn't cause malaria. It's the female Anopheles mosquito that will suck that blood, infected blood, with that Plasmodium in it, and transfer that infectious Plasmodium, infectious blood, to another person who might not have the infection, who might not have malaria. So this is how malaria is transmitted. So, and then again, you might have heard about dengue hemorrhagic fever. So, for dengue, there is another mosquito, Aedes aegypti, that carries the the infectious agent. So, dengue virus will be present. So, that is not a protozoa, that's a virus. So, any person who is suffering from dengue fever, they would have that virus positive in their blood. So it will not be the female Anopheles mosquito that carries malaria. It's another type of a vector that is known as Aedes aegypti, another type of mosquito that is specifically designed to carry blood from the person who's got dengue hemorrhagic fever or dengue viral fever, carries that virus from one person, from the infected person, to a person who is not infected. Okay, so the vectors are also different. So every vector will not carry the same organism. Okay, so there are different types of vectors. Very good. So protozoa can exist in an active and an inactive or dormant form. So dormant things are dead for for some time, and then they become alive when the situation suits them. So during this dormant portion of its life cycle, a protozoa can survive harsh conditions. So it's dead, but it's still alive in its own, and whatever types of anti-protozoal agents you have, they even extreme temperatures or harmful chemicals, they can withstand them. This allows the protozoa to resist host immune defenses and medications that are aimed at killing them. So, a protozoa can also exist outside a host, which allows for transmission from one host to another. So, unlike viruses who need a host to develop, to multiply, a protozoa can exist outside a host as well. Okay, so and then you don't need to have it within your body, the protozoa, to be um, transferred from one person to another. So it can happen outside the body as well. As I said earlier, yesterday, that hosts are the like we human beings, we are hosts to numerous infections, but there are certain infections that we can't be host to, such as rabies virus. So rabies virus will only live in dogs, in the saliva or the blood of dogs, and unless a dog bites you, you will not have rabies. So rabies is not a contagious disease because it does not spread from one person to another. It is an infectious disease, but it can't spread from one person to another. Okay, so there are certain diseases that are infectious, uh, such as COVID-19. It can spread from one person to another. There are certain diseases, infectious diseases, that are contagious also, such as COVID-19. And there are certain diseases that cannot be transferred from one person to another, such as rabies. There are infections, but they are not contagious. So, how do we differentiate between prokaryotes and eukaryotes? So they depend upon it depends upon their nuclear structure, how it is structured, the cell size, and how complex the cell is, and the organelles within them. So we human beings are multicellular. We are eukaryotes. We are multi-celled organisms, 100 to 1,000 times bigger than prokaryotes. That is why eukaryotes do not need to be seen under a microscope. DNA is stored within the nucleus. Okay. And for prokaryotes, which are single celled, they are always unicellular. So they are only based on one cell, and DNA is stored in the cytoplasm. So cytoplasm is a fluid that is there in the cell. Okay. So within us, we have a cell. We human beings have a cell. There's a nucleus within the cell, and within that nucleus there is DNA. But for prokaryotes, because it is just one cell, it doesn't have a nucleus within itself. It's just within that cell, the cytoplasm, the fluid within the cell, and there's the DNA that's stored there because they're based on only one cell. So this is Giardia protozoan, which causes GI upset. It causes infectious diarrhea. So if you see this organism, how is it built? What is it made up of? So we talked about protozoa, that they are single-celled organisms, but they are eukaryotes. So what do we learn about them? They have flagella. So whenever you have an organism that has flagella, these help them to move around. So you have flagella that are in the posterior part of their body, and you have flagella that are anterior. So this helps them to move around. So this is what we talked about, flagella that we talked about protozoa, that they can move um, from one place to another, unlike viruses or bacteria that can't move. They need a vector to be moved. So these can move, okay, when they are not in their dormant position. So they have a nucleus, as we said, that for a prokaryote, which is based on just one cell, it has to have the nucleus. The DNA does not exist in a nucleus, it exists in a cytoplasm. But here you can see that it has a nucleus. Okay. And within the nucleus, you will have the DNA or the replication material. The DNA is called the replication material, where it divides and multiplies itself. So this is why, as I said, this is what's the difference between UK. So this is a single-celled organism, but its DNA is stored in the nucleus. Okay. And then we talked about some parasites that are known as macroparasites. Yesterday we talked about them. Why macro? The size because of which they can be seen. Okay, so they are larger organisms that they also cause infections in humans. They can cause infections in large numbers of human beings across the world, and especially found in tropical and subtropical regions of the world. So you have lice, you have scabies, you have tapeworm, you have ticks. Okay, all of them, or these organisms, each one of them causes a different disease. The life cycle of these macroparasites. So parasite is something that lives on another organism. Okay, so they make use of another host organism for their division, for their multiplication, for their survival. So it makes it difficult for the human immune system to eradicate the infection, and similarly difficult for anti-parasitic medical treatments to be successful. So they're quite complex. So sometimes you can have control scabies, but at times the best of the best treatment doesn't help, and you have it for many for a very long time. And the same goes for lice, for tapeworm and ticks. And if they're prevalent, means if they're living in one place for some time, and if they're in large numbers, becomes even harder for them to be controlled. Other causes of infection. So, what are they? The four types of parasites that are responsible for many parasites, such as roundworm and hookworm. So, it's just not tapeworms. So, tapeworms, obviously, you can see them. You can see scabies, Sarcoptes scabi, which is the parasite that you can see with the naked eye. You can see lice. You can see ticks also. So that is why they're not. You don't need a microscope to look at them. But then, apart from tapeworms, there are other types of worms also, such as roundworm, hookworm. They cause different infections. They're different organisms that cause different infections. There are mites, such as scabies, and insects like head lice. These can cause infestation and scratching that may lead to secondary infection. So this is a problem that, for instance, some viral infections, they may have a superimposed bacterial infection. So you have a viral infection that has not been controlled properly, and then your immune system goes low, and then bacteria attack you. So these are known as opportunistic organisms. So for instance, if there's someone who has scabies, there's intense itching in scabies. So you might not have a bacterial infection before, but because you've scratched that area, you've made that into a wound, and that might then lead to infection, a bacterial infection. Because bacteria are everywhere and they just need an opportunity to get into your body. So, how do the structure of an organism, how does it enable them to function as a pathogen? So, a pathogen, as I said, they are there to cause infection or pathology. So, a pathogen is the organism that causes infection. Specific pathogens cause specific infections. So, cholera is caused by Vibrio cholera, and leishmaniasis is caused by different species of the protozoa Leishmania. So there are different categories of pathogens that can infect human beings. Pathogens causing the disease covered in this manual will include viruses. We've talked about viruses, bacteria, rickettsia, fungi, protozoa, and helminths, which are worms. All pathogens go through life cycles. Okay, so in order to complete their life cycle, they need the human body, or they need a host, a favorable host. But some organisms, as I said, they can live outside the host also. So in their life cycle, it takes the organism from reproducing adult to reproducing. This is like there's one male and one female, and then they reproduce together. And this cycle includes phases of growth, there's consolidation, there's change of structure, multiplication, reproduction, spread, and infection to a new host. So these all are known as the development of a pathogen. So it is only after this multiplication, reproduction, that you can have spread of infection. So before that, there are different phases which happen, but you might not see the signs or symptoms in the patient. So a patient might have this infection, but it is still not evident because the signs and symptoms are still not there, because there's been no multiplication reproduction. So once they multiply and reproduce, that is when the infection becomes contagious. So talking about a bacterial surface, what is there that makes them so unique? So this is the surface of Bacillus anthracis. It causes anthrax, which is again a very deadly infectious disease. Um, so if we see bacterial surface components, may have a primary biological function that has nothing to do with pathogenicity. So the function of lipopolysaccharides, LPS, in the outer membrane. So you have an outer membrane which has lipopolysaccharides. They're present in gram-negative bacteria. This is due to do with its permeability characteristics rather than its toxicity for animals. So this means that the different parts of an organism, they're different, various parts of an organism. It's not necessary that all of them are there for causing toxicity. So some might be for survival, some might be for reproduction, some might be for some other reason. So lipopolysaccharides at the outside layer of this gram-negative bacteria, it's to do with the permeability. So permeability means how permeable is the cell, how much can it. So if a cell is less permeable, that means even if you take antibiotics, or if you take um, let's say measures to protect yourself, such as hand sanitizers, they will have no impact on this organism if it is impermeable. So the more permeable means it can allow um, substances to pass through their cell body. But because this is if it's impermeable, it will become hard for you to kill this organism. Okay. And gram negative, we said, what are gram negative organisms? Which don't take stains. So we looked at them under the microscope, and if they stain, they're gram positive. If they don't stain, they're gram negative. But there are endless examples wherein a bacterial surface component plays an indispensable role in the pathogenesis of infectious diseases. So, having said that, this is just to show that uh, uh, not all components in of an organism are there for causing toxicity. They have different functions as well. So, anthrax, this is Bacillus anthracis that we talked about. So, there are different types of anthrax also. So, there's anthrax bovis. This is carried from cattle to man. So, anthrax disease and its transmission to man through the pathogen Bacillus anthracis. So, Bacillus is for bacteria. So the bacteria that is known as anthracis or Bacillus anthracis, it produces dormant spores. So this bacteria, it won't kill itself. It's going to produce spores that are not active. These can live in the environment like soil for a very long time, even for decades. So they can live for 10 years. So spores, how do these spores get into the body of an animal? It's when so it's when it is this when they're activated. So for instance, if there's spores here and they're living for a very long time, so when spores get into the body of this animal or a person directly, they can be activated and turn into active growing cells. So they're dead here, or dormant or inactive here. Once they get into the human body or the animal body, they become activated, and they start growing. When they become active, the bacteria will multiply, spread out in the body, and produce toxins or poisons and cause severe illness and death. So we saw that a bacteria itself is not causing the infection. A bacteria is giving rise to spores or eggs, and they remain alive, they remain inactive for a very long time. Once when they're ingested, they become active. Okay, and then when they're becoming active, these spores then produce toxins or poisons. Okay, and they cause severe illness and death. So bacterial structures, cell structures, sorry. So what about them? They may act as permeability barriers. So the surface outside the bacterial body, they may act as permeability barriers that allow selective passage of nutrients and exclusion of harmful substances such as antimicrobial agents. So have um, if you have certain organisms that are resistant to that, they're not dying with sanitizers. That means they have impermeable barriers. The barriers that are there, they are very strong, and they do not allow any um, such substance to get into them and hence kill them. There are adhesins. We talked about adhesins in certain organisms. They are there to attach to specific surfaces. Like I'll go back a few slides back from yesterday because this is the last slide for this learning outcome. So we had talked about uh, attachment proteins such as in viruses. So they are there for attaching themselves to the human being or whichever host cell they find. Okay, so they come into contact with them and then they attach to them and then they start their process. Even bacteria, some of the bacteria, they have fimbria. So we had talked about fimbria that are there to attach or stick to the host cell. Okay, so this is to make them even more strongly infect the organism. So if they're attached to the to the host where they're living, they can be even more lethal. So these are known as adhesins. They're enzymes to mediate specific reactions on the cell surface that are important in the survival of the organism. They have protective structures against phagocytic engulfment or killing. So this is protective structures such as the cell body itself that are resistant to killing, such as from an antimicrobial agent, or sometimes you want to um, phagocytosis is killing of an organism through different agents. So sometimes probably you would want to boil water. There's some organisms that will be resistant to boiling or to heat. They will not be killed. Okay, so this is because of their protective structures. Antigenic disguises to bypass activation of host immune defenses. So they have some disguises that are there. These help them. So if you're giving them the person, if you're giving an person an antibiotic, that organism might disguise itself so that even if that antibiotic is um, targeting that organism, it won't impact that organism. Then there are endotoxins that are generally cell wall components that can cause an inflammatory response to in the host. These are endotoxins. So these are toxins again or poisons that they have within their cell wall, and these can cause inflammation or signs of infection, such as you'll have redness in that place, you will have pain in that place. If there's, for instance, if you've got an insect bite, it will lead to an inflammatory response. Then there are sensing proteins that can respond to temperature, osmolarity, salinity, different types of environment, light, oxygen, nutrients that result in a molecular signal to the genome of the cell that will cause expression of some determinant of virulence. So an exotoxin will be produced. So they have sensing proteins also that sense different temperatures. So some organisms are highly adaptable. So some temperatures can kill organisms, as I said to you, and some organisms will withstand that temperature or those killing agents. Uh, so that's about it. These are the references for the first learning outcome. So if you have any queries, it's learnerwork@ukversity.co.uk. That's learnerwork@uk ukversity.co.uk, where you would want to email any queries if you have. This will be uploaded on Moodle. So I'm stopping share here. Any questions related to the first learning outcome? I'll just take your attendance. Just a screenshot of your attendance. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, I shall proceed towards the second learning outcome. Uh, just a minute. I know sometimes it gets complex, whatever you are studying, but if you study it again once, um, it's going to make more sense, and that's always going to be helpful. Just a minute. Okay. So I'll start sharing my screen for the second learning outcome. Okay. I'd really want to know your feedback on these sessions, because they're quite if you've not studied them before, they might be quite intense, whatever we are talking about. So if you've not understood anything, please do let me know. I can go through it again. um, yeah, I'm happy to do that. And otherwise, you have the recordings. And even if on the recordings you have any problem, please feel free to contact me on the email that I had mentioned. Okay, so we are starting LO2, which is understanding vector-borne disease transmission. We had talked about what are vectors. These are organisms that carry the infection from one person um, uh, to another, or from one organism to another. There are different types of vectors that carry different organisms. So the indicative content for this is such as transmission of diseases by vectors such as mosquitoes. They are carried by malaria. Mosquitoes will carry malaria. And then, as I said, there are different types of mosquitoes that carry malaria. So it is just the female mosquito of the genus Anopheles that will carry malaria, the parasite. It's not going to be the male. Okay, so and then for body lice, it is typhus. For ticks, they cause Lyme disease, and carnivores so body lice, they would cause typhus. So they and ticks are the vectors that cause Lyme disease, and then carnivores are obviously dogs that carry rabies, or other carnivores can also be there, such as foxes. So, what are vectors? They're living organisms. We've talked a bit about them before. They can transmit infectious pathogens between human beings, or from human beings, from animals, sorry, to humans. So, many of these vectors, they are blood-sucking insects which ingest disease-producing microorganisms during a blood meal from an infected host, human or animal, and later they transmit it into a new host after the pathogen has replicated. So what does this mean? Uh, so these vectors, they're blood-sucking. Okay, so some vectors, such as malaria, they suck the blood. Okay, and they ingest the disease producing microorganisms. So the microorganism gets entry, or the malarial parasite, it gets into the body of the vector, which is the mosquito, during this blood meal. And this mosquito will, so if I don't have malaria and a mosquito sucks my blood, and the mosquito doesn't have malaria as well in its blood, the parasite, uh, the mosquito will not be harmed, and I would not be harmed. But it is only when there is the mosquito has bitten someone and has got that parasite within its blood, that is when uh, it is infectious. And then when it flies to another or human being, it can transmit that infection or the parasite to that person um, once it has replicated. So within the mosquito also there is replication. I'm just giving an example of a mosquito. Often, once a vector becomes infectious, they are capable of transmitting the pathogen for the rest of their life during each subsequent bite. So they'll keep biting, they'll keep transmitting, they'll keep biting till the rest of their lives, till they're alive. Vector-borne diseases, they're human illnesses. They're caused by parasites. You can have them as viruses, bacteria that are transmitted by vectors. So they need a vector. They need some organism to transmit the infection from one body to another. So every year, there are more than 700,000 deaths from diseases such as malaria. You have dengue, schistosomiasis, human African trypanosomiasis, leishmaniasis, Chagas disease, yellow fever, Japanese encephalitis, and onchocerciasis. All of these are caused by vectors. So a vector it has a DNA molecule, uh, and it's used as a vehicle to carry a particular DNA segment into the host cell as part of a cloning or recombinant DNA technique. So a vector is one that transfers from one location to another to assist some biological process. So there are two types of vectors. So they're biological vectors and they're mechanical vectors. Okay. So I've told you what a vector is. Okay. So a biological vector. Now you have examples such as mosquitoes, you have flies, you have ticks, you have arthropods, and you have mechanical vectors such as mice and flies. Okay, so what are mechanical vectors? I'll talk about the less complex vector. So mechanical vectors are those that just carry the infection or the infectious agent, the virus, the bacteria, or the protozoa from one person or from one body to another. That's it. You just transmit, just like a car, just like a taxi. So you get into a taxi, you you go through the passage, and then you get off. You're not you're not doing anything there else in the taxi. It's just transported. Here, for instance, the taxi is a vector. Okay. The second type of vector is a biological vector, such as a mosquito. We've talked about this. So, what does this biological vector mean? That means that when the vector, I'll talk about malarial parasite again. So, if I am infected with malaria, I have Plasmodium malaria in my body, okay? The organism that is responsible for malaria. I was bitten by some mosquito, okay? I am bitten again by a mosquito that carries the blood of that my infected blood, and within that mosquito there is multiplication going to happen. Okay, so it doesn't only carry that blood and the organism or the plasmodium from me to bite another person. No, within that mosquito there will be multiplication. Okay, that mosquito is there for the mosquito's body is there for the organism to multiply, to reproduce. That is why it is a biological vector. Okay, the same happens with fleas or ticks. So these are fleas that again there's multiplication. Sorry, the this is fleas, not flies. This is fleas. There's a typo here. And then ticks also. Okay, so ticks also, sorry, they carry the infectious agent within themselves, but within that a tick, for instance, or within that mosquito, there will be multiplication. Okay, there'll be more reproducing. So that is the difference between a biological vector and a mechanical vector. So this is a list of vector-borne diseases according to the vector. So you have mosquito, uh, where you have different types of mosquitoes. So these are the vectors, okay? So you have mosquitoes as a vector, you have aquatic snails as a vector, you have black flies as a vector, fleas, you have lice, you have sand flies, you have ticks, uh, triatom bugs, and CC fly. Okay, these are all different vectors that cause that they carry different um, organisms within themselves. And these may be viruses, parasites, bacteria. So they're trained to carry one sort of an organism. So mosquito will not carry bacteria. It's either going to carry back a virus or a parasite. So let's say Aedes aegypti. Sorry. it's not going to carry malaria. Okay, you won't see malaria over here. It's going to cause diseases such as chikungunya. It's going to cause disease such as dengue, lymphatic filariasis. So in lymphatic filariasis, your lymphatic system, just like blood, we have a lymphatic system where lymph is there for our protection. So when you're attacked by this type of mosquito, your lymphatic system becomes deranged, and your legs, mostly your legs, they get swollen up. Uh, Sorry. So um, this is caused by a parasite. You have Rift Valley fever because of the bite of Aedes aegypti mosquito, which carries a virus. You have yellow fever, which is also a viral infection. You have Zika virus, causing Zika itself. Then you have the mosquito type known as the Anopheles, which causes lymphatic filariasis again. So you have Aedes also causing lymphatic filariasis. You have Anopheles also causing lymphatic filariasis. And the most important infection that is spread is malaria through this Anopheles mosquito. Then you have Culex, which again causes it. This okay, so this lymphatic filariasis is in particular can be carried by Aedes, Anopheles, and Culex. So three of them can carry this parasite. You have West Nile fever, that is also carried by Culex. Then you have aquatic snails that are vectors that carry schistosomiasis, which is a parasite. You have black flies that carry onchocerciasis, which is a parasite. You have fleas that uh, oh, okay, so this is a vector, and as I said, a rat they'll live in the body of a rat uh, to cause plague. Okay, so it's transmitted from rats to humans. It's a bacteria. Okay, so the disease is caused through a bacteria. Uh, and lice, for instance, this is the vector, and the disease caused is typhus or louse borne relapsing fever. These are bacteria that are carried by lice. Sandflies carry leishmaniasis and sandfly fever. They cause them. Okay. Ticks, you can have CCHF such as Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. They can cause Lyme disease, relapsing fever, rickettsial diseases, tick-borne encephalitis, and tularemia. So flies can cause sleeping sickness, and triatom bugs can cause Chagas disease. So the point to note here is that there's a long list of vectors that carry particular types of pathogens and cause a particular type of disease. Okay, so then your one learning outcome was to explain how different vectors are able to transmit disease in humans. So a vector-borne disease, it's a disease that is caused when an insect transmits a disease through feeding. As a mosquito, um, it causes malaria, and it is transmitted by the female mosquito. This is an example of biological transmission as the infectious agent grows inside the mosquito. It's up as opposed to a mechanical transmission where there's tra- uh, just transport happening. Okay, from the fly, it carries a bacteria, and it transmits it to another, let's say to food, or to it sits on the food, and that food is ingested by a human being. So there's no multiplication happening within the fly. It's just that the fly carries an infectious agent from one place to another, just transports it. There's nothing happening else otherwise. So how does a mosquito transmit malaria? So malaria is caused by a protozoa called Plasmodium. So when a female mosquito feeds from an infected individual, the protozoa reproduces in the gut or in the stomach of the mosquito. So it's there where the multiplication happens. The protozoa then migrates to the mouth or the salivary glands of the mosquito, where it grows and becomes ready to infect. So it's there in the mouth, it's growing there. So when the saliva is injected into the next human being, uh, when the mosquito bites through the skin, it transfers the infection. Okay. So an Anopheles mosquito is a species responsible for transmitting malaria. So this is a normal cell, a human cell, red blood cell. And then this is an infected red blood cell. So malaria parasites, they multiply in the red blood cells. Okay, so this is where they are multiplying, the malarial parasites. This is an infected cell, a normal cell is this. And this is a mosquito transmitting the disease. And they have adhesions also as adhesion knobs to stick to the blood. So therefore, I think there just two or three more slides. Yes, so we'll go through them. There are four different species of Plasmodium. What it is. So it affects the human beings. So each one has a distinct appearance under the microscope. Each one produces a different pattern of symptoms. Two or more species can live in the same area and infect a single person at the same time. So at the same time, you might have Plasmodium falciparum, you may have Plasmodium. So remember, Plasmodium is the organism that is being carried from one person through the mosquito. Okay, so Plasmodium. Uh, as I said, is a parasite. Okay, so this parasite is being carried from one person to another. So you have Plasmodium falciparum, vivax, malaria, and ovale. So there are four different types of Plasmodium. Okay, so vivax, so you can have four of them together, but that is very uncommon. Uh, but it can happen. So Plasmodium falciparum, it's responsible for most malaria deaths. It's fatal, especially in African countries, and the infection can develop suddenly, produce several life-threatening complications, but it's very treatable if caught early. Plasmodium vivax, it's the most widespread of the species, and it is not as severe as other strains. Relapses, so once you have it, you can have chronic diseases are very difficult for the host. So chronic diseases are those that live for a very long time. Plasmodium vivax is found throughout Asia. Plasmodium malaria, so these infections can exist in the blood for very long periods, possibly decades, without even reproducing themselves. So they live dormant in the human body. A person with no symptoms can still infect others. So they have no symptoms, they have no fever, but they can still infect themselves. This is through blood donation or mosquito bites. So if I'm infected, I don't have the symptoms, but a mosquito bites me. The mosquito will take my blood and bite another person with my having my infected blood. So Plasmodium malaria has been wiped off out from temperate climates, but it still persists in Africa, unfortunately. Plasmodium ovale is rare. It can cause relapses and generally occurs in West Africa. So these African countries, they have a lot of um, uh, the environment is different. Okay, they're temperate zones. They're hotter, and are favorable for mosquitoes to grow there. So mosquitoes grow in dry in wet, damp areas. They're dark areas because of obviously the growth there of the natural habitat over there. So Plasmodium, this is how you see them in the blood of a human being. So they have different parts of of their body. So you have a coat outside their body. There's a plasma membrane, which is then again they have different permeabilities for different anti-infectious agents. They have a nucleus within which they will have a material to replicate. They have mitochondria, which give them energy. They have microtubules. They have an apical end. This is the Plasmodium. This is not the malarial parasite. We are talking about the Plasmodium, which is the organism itself, which is transmitted through through the mosquito. So a bit about statistics. So vector-borne diseases, they account for more than 17% of all infectious diseases, and they cause more than 700,000 deaths on an annual rate. They can be caused by either parasites, bacteria, or viruses. Malaria is a parasitic infection that is transmitted by female Anopheles mosquito, causes estimated 219 million cases globally, and it results in more than 400,000 deaths every year. Most of these deaths occur in children under the age of 5 years because they have less immunity. Dengue is also a very difficult to tackle infection. It's the most prevalent viral infection that is transmitted by Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. More than 3.9 billion people in over 129 countries are currently at risk of contracting dengue viral hemorrhagic fever or dengue viral fever. And there are an estimated of 96 million symptomatic cases, so they have the symptoms, and an estimated 40,000 deaths every year. Other viral diseases that are transmitted by vectors, we've talked about them. There are chikungunya fever, Zika virus fever, yellow fever, West Nile fever, Japanese encephalitis. These are all transmitted by mosquitoes, and tick-borne encephalitis, which is transmitted by ticks. Many of these vector-borne diseases are preventable through protective measures and community mobilization. So we will talk more about the prevention. These are the references for today's session. We've developed this session based on these references. Again, if you have any queries, any questions, kindly email on learnerwork@ukversity.co.uk. Is everything clear for today? Yeah, is everything clear? I'll stop recording.